Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to 10:15 in the morning. It's a good time to be here, and we're glad to be here. My name is Steve Mulder. I'm a Principal User Experience Consultant at Molecular. We're based in Boston. And my colleague?
My name is Glenn Barnett. I'm a Principal Consultant from the engineering side of the house.
So we're here to represent the art and science of Ajax, maybe?
Fair enough.
That sounds good. And on stage live before you, you can see a user experience guy and a technologist fight it out. But not really. I wish I could be a little more confrontational. We'll look for ways to be as controversial as we possibly can. And if you want to encourage any kind of battles, feel free to do so. So we're here today to talk about a project, kind of a skunkworks project that Glenn and I and another colleague have been working on for a little while. That's about a fundamental problem on the web, at least as we see it. And that is finding stuff, which I'm sure this slide very clearly represents. If you think about it, one of the biggest challenges on many websites is how do we help users find stuff? And whatever that stuff is, it could be in an e-commerce site, finding the right product that matches my needs. On a content site, finding just that right article that's what I'm looking for based on whatever criteria I want. On a dating site, finding, so everything's about finding one way or another. And one of the core challenges that we often look at when we're thinking about helping different companies evaluate how their websites are currently performing is we do this conversion funnel analysis. So the basic way this works is you look at, of all the people that come into our website, of all the people, the total visitors that come in, how many of them actually reach a product page? How many of them add it to their cart? How many of them actually go through checkout and finish the buy process? In this sort of dummy data here, about 5% of visitors who came in through the site actually completed checkout. And even if you're not doing e-commerce, you can do this kind of analysis. But you can look at what do we want users to do on the website? How do we measure that? How do we get them through that process so that that conversion rate actually gets higher? So when we look at a lot of websites, we tend to look at them in this light and gather data on what they're currently doing and look for places where there's opportunity. In a lot of websites, we look at checkout, for example. So we look at, of all the people that put products into their cart, how many of them actually complete checkout? And if it's a scary number with lots of room for improvement, we know there's an opportunity there. So one of the things we did a couple of years ago was think about how can we make richer experiences help make the checkout process easier. So we developed this thing called single screen checkout, which I'm not going to talk about a whole lot here, but it was essentially our way of saying, how can we make the experience of checkout feel faster, feel more intuitive, and apply kind of rich internet application, rich interface technologies to this fundamental problem? I mean, how many checkout interfaces are there on the web? It's probably in the thousands, millions by now. And so you can see that this is basically all takes place on a single screen. It's really a way for people to, while they're checking out, see their little items in the cart to the left there. They can go back and forth and make changes. And it doesn't feel like this set of 10 pages in a row that I have to click through. It's all taking place on one screen. And I can make changes at the last minute, to what items are in my cart. And of course, everything gets updated as you might expect. And what we found was just doing something like this. We actually tested this in A/B testing. We wanted to find out what would happen if we took traditional checkout process, HTML-based, similar design, but traditional HTML, page, and we compared it to this and actually launched both of them. And we found that actually this performs much better. The conversion rate actually went up by about 50% on this version versus the traditional HTML version in just side-by-side A/B testing. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about another part of the funnel that we were very interested in looking into. So we felt like we had learned a lot about checkout and that part of the funnel. But surely there must be a good way of applying what we've learned to this core problem kind of higher up the food chain, which is how do we help people better find products in the first place? Products that match their needs, that match what they're looking for. So if you think about it, sites have been doing this for ages, right? Helping people find the products they need. If we look at kind of the old school way of doing this, if we go into Staples and we're looking for a digital camera, we drill down their navigation, of course. We get to the digital cameras. The only way to browse here is by megapixels, so I guess we'll click on a certain megapixel range. But let's say we want to filter by just a certain price range, and we want to find cameras with zoom. Well, there's no real way to filter by price here, so I guess we'll sort. That works. So I can sort by price and get the lowest prices first. And then let's say we want to find just those cameras that have a certain level of zoom that are built in. And there's no real easy way to do that here. You're kind of left on your own to sort of look through, and I guess use product comparison. That's probably a good way to get down deeper and figure out which ones are going to match the exact specs that I want. But there's no way to do that right on the interface. I've got to click through all these things, the page reloads. Now I get sort of the classic product comparison where I need to look through and page back and forth. It's okay. I mean, it works, but it seems like it's a lot of clicks to get what I want. I guess version 2 of this is faceted navigation. So PC Connection does things a little bit differently. Let's do the same thing. Let's look at digital cameras. And we're going to drill down here. And you'll notice right away that they give me a lot of options right up front. It's not just about megapixels. I can browse any way I want to in any order. So first I'm going to narrow by megapixels, and then I'm going to continue to narrow. Now I can actually narrow by zoom right here in the interface. And I'm doing it in combination. That's what faceted navigation is all about. So I can actually apply these filters, and they build on each other, and I'm gradually winnowing my list of cameras. And this feels a little easier now. Now I'm actually getting the control back to me and able to filter as I want to filter, instead of resorting to scanning a lot of information and using product comparison. And it's still a lot of clicks. And every time I click, the whole page reloads, and there's some limitations here. But it feels like we're moving in the right direction to give users more control, essentially, more power over their ability to find what they want to. But there's still some pain points here. So one I mentioned. One is that every time I click to do one of these filters, the whole page reloads. I've got to wait for the whole thing to reload every time. So it's still page after page after page. The other problem is, even though we're giving users a lot of control here, we're looking by price and megapixels and so on, it's still limiting. I mean, what if I only have $400 to spend, for example? The option is $250 to $500. But if I've only got $400, then I'm seeing a lot of wasted results here that I'd rather not see. I'd like more control as a user. The thing about faceted navigation is it can feel like a control room that can be a little overwhelming. There's a lot of different things you can do, and even with all that power, which is a good thing, it's still too slow, and we still don't have enough control, like we were just talking about. Now, what we wanted to try was, let's take a look at Ajax, this newfangled super friend that's out there, and see what we can do. And let's see really what it would take to take an interface like PC Connection to the next level, to help people be able to sort and filter in a more intuitive and faster way. So we called in our little superhero here and really just started playing with ideas. And what I want to do is show you the first version of this. There have been 2 versions so far, and probably about 94 to come. But the first version here, which I designed, so that's why it looks really kind of ugly and in your face, and I promise it will get better. So just shield your eyes if you need to. But the way that we did this was, of course, you can filter by wine type. We know that that's important, so you can click and filter down. But notice what just happened. The first thing is the results part of the page refreshes, but not the whole page. And you get that result, well, immediately if our connection were faster here. Hopefully it will respond. Yeah, that's unfortunate. There we go. So you can filter down by, of course, different types. You'll notice that some things are highlighting as I mouse over them. So one of the ideas we had was, when people are selecting an option, let's give them feedback on what impact this is going to have. So not only do you see how many wines are going to show up, 2,500 something, but you also get that in the results set. So when I click on Pinot Noir, that result folds up, and more results come in behind it to actually backfill. So you get that instant response. You're not waiting for the whole page to load until you get to look again. And you probably already noticed this other thing that we were trying out, which is sliders. So I can filter by slider. I can drag this. And again, you see as I'm filtering, I have total control over the exact price down to each dollar I want. And this solves that issue we saw with PC Connection. Now I can actually have the level of control that I want to. So as I filter down here, you'll see they start dropping off. So once again, when I let go, those results fold up and then more come in below. So I'm able to look at results immediately, and that was really critical. And I feel like it's much more of an application than page after page after page in our traditional model of websites, right? So I can continue to filter, of course, by all these things, and it's all optional. I can filter with just ones I want to, and I can go back in and refilter and so on. One of the things you'll probably also have noticed that we experimented with were the histograms you're seeing here. And the idea was, just as with interfaces here, you can tell people how many are they going to get. I'm going to get 500 if I click on this. Giving people a sense of the impact of their possible choices, we found that really tests very well with consumers. They want to know, if I make this choice, am I going to end up with 2 or 2,000? That's going to impact whether I choose this or not. So we thought, with a slider, how do you do that? So the idea, and this isn't a new idea by any means, but trying to do this in the interface in a simple way was a challenge. So the idea, of course, is as I'm sliding this over, the taller the bars, the more results at that particular value. So I can see that I'm really going to drop off to very few results once I get to this point, or I can broaden it out. But that was the idea of the histograms. And we're going to take you through, what we did was actually run some usability tests on this and take you through what worked and what didn't work and kind of what we learned getting towards version 2 of the 94 versions that we're still working on. But this is kind of the basic approach of filtering down, allowing customers more choices about how they want to filter. How do you want to find things? Use any of these in any combination you want to. And doing so in a way that gives them fast response so they can see the results of their actions immediately. There's something else we wanted to try as well, and that was thinking about the result set. Anytime you have a list of things like this, we were trying to think about how do we expose all the rich content we have without making users click to get a description, to get more information about where this wine is from, that kind of thing. And there's a lot of ways people have explored doing this right on the page without making users click. What we tried was something on rollovers. So when you mouse over a given result, it expands. So you get description, you get where it's from, you can actually rate the wine, you can just click and it happens right here. And you can mouse over another one and you get that one, and you can even mouse over an image and you zoom in, and this is kind of fake imagery, so excuse that, but you get the idea. You can quickly navigate around and look at the different wines without having to leave this page. And we were really interested to see how this tested in particular, because as you mouse around, you can imagine, it gets a little crazy potentially. But that was something else that we wanted to test. We want to understand: do people want to see more information on this page, and is this the right interaction to make that possible? Okay, so let me go back and talk a little bit more about what we learned next, and what we did in this whole crazy experiment. So our basic process to get here was very small and agile. I mentioned it was Glenn and Ricardo, our colleague, and I really just whiteboarding and demoing, prototyping stuff on the fly in a very iterative way. We didn't do a lot of detailed wireframes for this. We didn't really have flow diagrams, and it sometimes got us in a little trouble, but honestly, it kept us really agile and ever-changing. We tried a ton of different things for that rollover state that I talked about. We tried one where it was like a balloon text that appeared, and it was a layer over here, and it enabled us to try a lot of things very quickly. And we were in a fortunate position because we didn't have a client for this. We were our own client. So that means we could be experimental and not feel like every week we had to report back, this is what we're doing, this is what we're trying, and really have explanations for it. But I know a lot of us aren't always in that situation. We need to create concepts, present them to a stakeholder team, and talk about what works, what we think is best, and have that discussion back and forth in a way that's a little more documented. So I wanted to show you one of the tools that we've used on actually a very different project that was helpful actually for this kind of problem, for explaining to people what we intend to do before we actually go out and build it. In other words, how do we take simple tools like wireframes, which have always been static, and make them better express all this rich interaction that we're increasingly being asked to do? So this was something that we did. This was like an animated wireframe that we did for a client to do exactly that, to explain to them this is how it could work and feel, but it's not designed yet, it's not working yet, it's just quickly done in PowerPoint. So this is actually a course builder for, imagine a professor, you're building a course, you want to put a bunch of course materials together for your course this fall. So you'd fill out the information about your class, you'd hit save, and these panels might expand, and all this information would come in, and if you wanted to find material for your course, you might click on a particular topic like marketing. So then the Find Materials pane expands. You can maybe, like with these faceted navigation filters here, you could filter by advertising as a particular topic that you want. So you filter that down. Maybe on the results list there would be a similar kind of rollover state. So when you're mousing over, you see more information. That could be an option. And then, of course, you can add it to your course. So I'm going to take this material, add it to my course. Which course? Okay, well, this one. And we've even got sort of the yellow highlighting happening. So now it goes up there, and you've added it to your course materials. And if you want, you could even view the whole list. So this was, for us, an incredibly valuable way to explain to the client this is what we have in mind conceptually, and this is sort of how it will feel. It's not designed yet. It's obviously not working. What we did to actually do this was I created Visio wireframes, the classic static wireframes. I chopped them up into little bits, took them into PowerPoint, and used PowerPoint's absurd animation tools to move them around on click, and it was a nightmare to create because PowerPoint sucks at doing this kind of thing. The level of control you get is bizarre, the weird inconsistencies that happen, but it's possible to do. And honestly, I didn't have a better tool to do something like this in. I don't know Flash. I probably should, because that would be an obvious winner here. But this was the quickest way I could figure out of how to create a prototype very quickly. Well, not quite so quickly, but somewhat quickly, and certainly more quickly than actually building it, or more quickly than working with a Flash designer to actually make it come to life. So something to think about, and I hope that we see more tools that enable us to do things like this really quickly, because I really feel like that can make a big difference in any of these rich internet applications that we don't think about. Yeah.
So yesterday's keynotes, we learned a little bit about the risks involved using Ajax regarding search and regarding accessibility issues. So not specifically with this, but earlier in the line course display, can you tell me a little bit about how you mitigate that risk?
Yeah, the questions are really around accessibility more than in search optimization as well. And a lot of what we have here is a thought experiment, and we're doing a lot of research now into, especially the SEO side, to really determine, because we know that Google actually downgrades a site, or there's a certain level of skepticism that Googlebot brings into the situation when you layer content, like what we were seeing in the demo, the first demo I showed you. And what we found is that it's still a tough question because more and more sites are doing this. So we believe that in the long run, the Googlebot will become better. But right now, it's very difficult. And what we're actually doing, like for the single screen checkout I showed, what we actually did was create two checkouts. So we had this Flash version and we had an HTML version. And I think if we were to do this wine demo for a client, we would actually need to think about doing the same thing, is actually having two versions so that there's one version that's accessible, first and foremost, and also optimized for search engines as well, because those two tend to come hand in hand more often than not. And then we have the rich internet version for those users who are prepared for that as well. That's the unfortunate state of our world right now, because there's not an easy way to guarantee that the layered content, whether it's in Ajax or in Flash, of course, is going to be immediately accessible and immediately exposed to search engines as we want it to. It's an ongoing challenge that is huge for all of us, and there isn't an easy answer right now as I wish there would be.
Could I add to that? So there's, as Steve said, the tempting way to do it is to build essentially a light version and a heavy version, and the heavy version is more dependent on JavaScript and Ajax calls and so on. The alternative to that would be to build one version that can handle both scenarios. And there are emerging technologies that facilitate that sort of thing. I remember watching David Hennemeyer-Hansen of Ruby on Rails demo an Ajax application where if you turned off JavaScript, it would still give you the functionality, but it would give you in a sort of the traditional page-by-page way. And so accessibility limited clients could traverse all the aspects of the page. Search engine spiders could do the same thing. But it's very difficult. It's tremendously difficult. And I bet if you ran the numbers, it would be more affordable to build two versions than to build a one-size-fits-all, especially with the patterns that have emerged as far as how you set up your interfaces with the presentation layer separated from the data model and so on and so forth. That's still the better way to go. And there's other ways where, I think the reality is we're going to have to support multiple versions of the interface. Mobile devices is another example. You're not going to have one interface to serve all three. So we're of that bent, but it is possible. And there are toolkits emerging from the Rails community, from the Yahoo UI library that can sort of have a failover mode that will still operate without JavaScript, but it's not the optimal way to go.
As an experiment, what you might want to try is that the PC Connection site that we looked at earlier, the way that's actually created is if you have an older browser like an Netscape 4 that doesn't have that's actually not Ajax, but just like DHTML sliding in and out. If you have an older browser, it actually has a fallback CSS file so that you can actually still use the site. what you get is sort of a second column with all the filters always showing, and then the result set just gets squashed a little bit, but it's still usable. So they thought a lot about how to fall back and make the page accessible, and make the page accessible not only with people with disabilities and screen readers, but also for older browsers as well, which is something that we always need to at least think about, have that conversation. So I mentioned that we usability tested our little interface. This is my new slide around usability testing. What do you think? So we wanted to know, there was a lot we were experimenting with here, as is no doubt obvious. And we really wanted to get people in front of this to understand what's working, what isn't working, and what can we continue to evolve as we play around. So we got a test of, I think it was 10 or 12 people, people that were not necessarily very web savvy, who weren't necessarily wine experts either, who knew wine a little bit, just to be able to use the interface. But a wide range of people, because we wanted to make sure we were not just getting people who, already knew about Flickr and Kayak and Delicious and all the sites that we all love to play with. We were actually very lucky here. So this is the wine demo we have here is actually built on top of Endeca. Endeca is a sort of a classic faceted navigation software solution, and Endeca ships with a default wine data set. And so that's why you see it's on wine here. And please don't hold us accountable for incorrect wine information. But what we did was we were able to actually A/B test our new design. So because the good news is Endeca also does their own default implementation of a wine store. So this was really interesting, and I rarely get this opportunity, right, that we can actually test two interfaces of exactly the same data. So we tested our interface to the wine data, and then this is the default Endeca implementation of that same exact wine data, the same filters, just in a different interface. So we could test both of these against each other and really understand what worked well about each one. So what worked well? So we'll take you through a couple of the things here in our testing. One thing we were wondering about was the sliders. Will people get it? Will people experiment and realize they can drag this thing along? And sure enough, everyone played with it. It was really reassuring to see that happening, and they really got it. They really understood what it was doing, and the instant feedback really made that work, I think. Because if it had the whole page reloaded and everything disappeared and come back, then it would have been, I think, a big problem. The histograms that I talked about, this was something that I think tested pretty well. There were some people who didn't know what it was, really, and the good news was actually they just ignored it. It didn't seem to get in the way of them using the rest of the site. They just kind of ignored it and went about their business, and were still able to use it. And for the people that did recognize what the histograms were about and what they were representing, they thought they were helpful. And I think that's an interesting paradigm for all of us, is when we think about advanced features that are going to be specific to a certain audience, how do we add those into the experience in a way that the people who don't care about them can just ignore, and their experience will still be a good one? It's a challenge because you're trying to serve multiple audiences at once, obviously. Being able to echo back what they chose to us, often this is done in faceted navigation via like a breadcrumb at the top or all different ways. And we just use simple checkboxes. When you make a choice, it's reflected back to you as a checkbox. And if you want to change that choice and select a different white wine instead, you just unclick the checkbox and the page refreshes. And one thing we were kind of concerned about was there's no submit button below those checkboxes. It's a little unusual, All that happens is the minute you deselect Sauvignon Blanc, that right-hand side, the results refresh. And then the filters refresh as well, so you can choose a different white wine if you want to. And what we found is actually that didn't bother people at all, because they understood the familiarity of having the checkbox was what far outweighed in terms of a benefit any downside to there being no submit button. So they uncheck the box, they see the results refresh immediately, they get the little message, and they're fine. And no one seemed bothered by that. So that was something else that I thought was interesting, because it was definitely a departure from how we typically see checkboxes used in forums. So the results set here, where we've got the rollovers that are happening, exposing this stuff, people really liked having the information here. They liked the description. They liked that they didn't have to click to actually learn more about the wine. However, the rollover implementation, no, that was actually the worst thing that tested of everything, was that the way the rollover happened and the execution of that. I'll talk more about that in a minute. And then finally, of course, the updating the results right in the page, not loading a whole new page every time. That went over very well. I mean, people really responded to how fast it felt, and how it felt like the site was working for them and more like an application, and less like page after page after page after page. So even though it might seem like the same number of clicks to people, it felt faster because it felt like it was all on one page. Well, one thing we did that we actually found was really important was when we built this originally, we found it actually updated too fast, which is kind of a strange thing. So someone would make a selection or drag the slider and let go, and the results would go so fast that people didn't even realize they changed. And so we actually slowed it down, which is rare, but we actually slowed down, especially the updating your results layer. What we did was actually, where that would normally just come up for like a split second and be gone because the results were updated, we actually slowed it down, made it appear longer, and made it actually stick longer to make sure people actually saw it. And that made a big difference in the interface. But it was a strange phenomenon that, we never thought we'd be in the position to like purposefully slow down an interface, but there we were. We really needed to do that. I really talked about this, this idea of people easily being able to ignore features they don't see. So if people don't see the histograms at first when they come to the site, that's okay. They can still use it. If they don't see the rollover state, that's all right. They can still click on the wine name and actually go to the result page. And over time, as they use the site, as those features become more exposed to them, as they become more expert users, then that supports their use. Then if they notice the histograms, they'll become useful over time. So we found that progressive disclosure of features, I guess, is something that really seems to work. And I know I'm going to be looking for ways to use this more and more, ways to progressively expose what people can do on the site. Okay, so in terms of the visual design, what we found were some interesting flaws, I think. So what we wanted people to come to the site and feel like was a dashboard that was really slick, very simple, but gave them lots of control, but in a very intuitive way. Unfortunately, what they actually experienced felt more like this to them. It still just felt too overwhelming, like the PC Connection site where there's all these things you can do in combination and everything's flying everywhere and you don't really know where to look. It just felt like it's too much to people. And we spent a lot of time trying to get behind this because I think that we all want to give users more power. We want to give them more control over their experience so they can make it what they want to. But a lot of times more power can feel just complicated. It can feel like just more complexity. And we had people say, this is like a site for wine experts because they saw all the histograms and all the filters and everything going on. And a big challenge for us was how do we give them the control that many of them want but not make it feel like there's so much to do? How do we bring that down from and a lot of this is visual, but I think also in terms of interaction style. How do we give them just what they want, but in a way that feels simpler than what it really is? It's a problem I know that we've all faced. So I wanted to talk about the rollovers. So this is an example, of one of the experiences somebody might have as they're playing around, mousing around the page. And what struck us was a lot of people seemed to feel like this website was just a little bit out of their control. that basically as they moused over, things were sort of flying and they were moving over here and everything was moving back and forth and it just felt too much out of their control in a fundamental way. And a lot of people just hated that. I mean, the passion that people expressed, against this interface, against this, for some of them, it just ruined the whole experience. Like the whole wine store, it was just not working for them because they just could not get past this sort of bizarre random rollover effect that was going on. So that was definitely an issue for us going into the next versions. Another one was we created these layered drop-downs that look like drop-downs, but they're actually like the HTML things. But we didn't do them quite right. Like we made people scroll all the way down to get to the find the United States on this list. Then they updated it. They would click on the link. They'd get pushed to the top of the page. They'd have to click another one, and meanwhile the right things are mousing all over. And it was like we took a familiar friend, the drop-down menu, and like made it not work like that anymore. And people didn't get that. They didn't get, why do I have to scroll this drop-down menu? It's not a real drop-down menu. And we had two choices with this. We could have continued to evolve our little DHTML approach to drop-downs to make it work exactly like a drop-down menu. That was choice one. Choice two was we could just use drop-down menus. And that's what we did. We went back to what people know and what people love and what they're used to doing and used drop-down menus in our new version and just styled them to whatever degree we could. So we'll show you that too in a sec. And then the back button question. This was something that we really wanted to know in usability testing was, let's say you move a slider on the price and you let go and the results refresh. If you hit the browser back button right now, what do you think will happen? So we actually didn't implement a browser back button in version 1. We decided let's just ask people during our usability test what they would expect. So we asked them, and they said, universally, we want it to work like an undo button. Yes, we would expect that slider to move back and to set the price that we wanted, that we were set to before. We would expect that drop-down menu choice that we made to be undone. We would not expect to go all the way back to the wine homepage of the store. So we want it to work like it would, like an undo function would in Photoshop. And we heard that again and again. And that was really important feedback for us, because what we did was we didn't have to waste time up front developing a back button workaround. We could actually do it now based on what real people wanted, now that we actually knew, because we just asked them and they told us. So that was something that we implemented as sort of part of version 2, which is actually what Glenn's going to take us through in a second. Also, as part of this research, what we did was test a couple of other sites that have been experimenting with this, with winnowing down via sliders and all sorts of rich internet things. This was something that they've actually redesigned this since then, fortunately. This is myrateplan.com. And we tested this interface because we were very curious, not only, of course, how did the sliders function, but how do people feel about all the phones appearing and the description that appears when you hover over a phone that appears up there. And we tested a lot of things with this interface. What we found was that, yes, people really like the idea of narrowing down phones really quickly with the sliders and so on. That worked really well. And seeing the phone details right on the screen with that rollover state, that worked really well as well. However, no one liked what the interface looked like when they first got there. It was just like, whoa, all this stuff to do, way overwhelming, and a lot of unexpected behavior. So I know this is kind of small, but for example, there's this phone design thing that's here, and there's a button that says Any. So if you wanted like a clamshell flip phone versus a brick phone, what you have to do is actually click on the Any button, and it kind of cycles among the different choices. And you keep clicking to cycle among Any, flip phone, brick, Any, and you keep going. Not what people expected. You also look at the carriers here. You can, this is Verizon, Singular, T-Mobile, Sprint, Nextel. If you want to select one, what you do is what we asked people to do was, how would you select one? What they actually did was that, they clicked on Verizon, right? Unfortunately, when they click on Verizon, you get an X. So it actually has the opposite effect of what they intended. You have to X out the ones you don't want. So there were a lot of things here, simple things, that really affected the experience and were good lessons for us. We also tested Kayak. Have people used Kayak? Excellent. Kayak's a fantastic website. And here, actually, the sliders and the interface tested much better. I mean, people responded well to this being a simpler design. There was still kind of some clutter going on, but it was simpler. It was very fast, and results refresh on the page. The sliders, the checkboxes, they're familiar, and they seem simple to use to people. So this one tested a lot better. Okay, so we're going to get into version 2.0. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague.
Sure. So after we got all this great feedback and sort of aggregated it into a plan for what things we were going to change, what things we were going to keep the same, and also enlisted the help of someone from our creative department to actually make it look pretty.
Thank goodness.
Yes, this is what we ended up with. So fundamentally it's the same idea. Instead of having a double drop down for wine type and wine subtype, if you will, or wine type and wine grape variety, we came up with this notion of a tabbed drop down. So I can see all the different reds here. If I click on all and view all wines, I can see all the different grape varieties, reds, whites, sparkling, etc. Things like that. It was sort of a new paradigm, but it worked really well. Instead of having the horrible mouse over functionality, we decided to give the user that control they wanted, and we struggled with the name. What should we call the ability to sort of get the next level of detail without committing to the results page? We ended up with Quick Look, and we designed the button to look like that, and so the user clicks on it to have a quick look at a little bit more detail, and they can click it again to close it, and I can look at this one, I can look at that one. It all works great. The sliders we kept the same. We made a few changes. So we reduced the height of the histograms just to give us some more real estate. And we also made them not show up until the user starts to interact with the slider. And really the goal there was to avoid that initial get to the results and, oh my God, I'm overwhelmed. Oh my God, this looks like a spaceship. We wanted to do something to just tone it down a little, but still provide what Steve was talking about, where experts who want that next level of information have a way to get it. It would be even better if we asked the user somehow through some seamless way. Do you want this? Do you not? Is there an expert mode and a simple mode for the site? Is it in their profile? There's a lot of things I think that sites going forward can experiment, but certainly the idea that different segments of the user base have different needs for the experience is something that's very true, and we want to provide as much control as the users want to take on. So we can drag down, and that functionality is pretty much the same. It goes and it updates. It just looks a little prettier while it's doing it. As you can see, we went back to the traditional drop-down. We used the operating system or the default implementation of a drop-down. The only caveat there is we have the special behavior when you hover over an option in a list. It does the neat thing where it highlights certain elements. Internet Explorer doesn't support that JavaScript event, so Internet Explorer it doesn't do that. You get the full list regardless of what you're hovering over, and that's unfortunate. But at the end of the day, the functionality is sort of a nice to have, and it was worth the trade-off of having good drop-down functionality as opposed to putting that extra whistle on the Internet Explorer implementation of the site. The back button was another thing we did. So I can click through and I can paginate and I can make filter changes and so on and so forth, and the back button actually works. So it'll take me back to the first page, and if I hit it again, it'll undo the last filter I did, which I think was Argentina, and so on and so forth. I can go forward, I can go backwards, I can even bookmark it. We use what's called the really simple history framework. If you Google it, you can see the page. It's just a simple JavaScript library that has some event hookups. We had to change our Ajax JavaScript architecture a little bit to play nice with it, but we were able to use it pretty effectively. It's not perfect, and if anybody's interested in a little bit more of the details, you can talk to me afterwards. I won't bore you with the technicalities. I also understand that the Yahoo UI library has a new equivalent to this, like a little back button support package they provide, and I hear it's really good. I haven't worked with it firsthand. So going back to the deck here. The wine type, we changed it a little bit. We kept it pretty much intact because it worked pretty well to begin with. The drop-downs are the typical drop-down, no question. Don't try to reinvent the wheel on that. The sliders, they just show up when the user gets there to avoid that initial complexity. And the quick look functionality was something that was just very effective. Hands down, it was a much better way to do it. And it is a great way to allow the user to sort of dip their toe in the water and see, do I really want to click through this? And I'm going to have to go back to come back here, or maybe I can get that next level of information. It's something that has a lot of applications just in search implementations. So how it all started, probably close to 2 years ago now, my colleague Ricardo started building this application in ASP.NET Atlas, which was the code name for what is now known as ASP.NET Ajax. It's a really easy way to get started for .NET developers. You actually write .NET code, either VB or C#, and it takes care of generating the JavaScript for you. The Ajax calls, all of that is done by the compiler. The downside is you don't have a lot of control. So if you want to go into this drop-down and if you hover over one thing, something happens with JavaScript. If you do another thing, something else happens. We weren't able to get that level of sophistication and control in what we were doing. The documentation at the time was poor. But the biggest challenge was the APIs kept changing from the release to release. And that's expected in a sort of beta product, but the reality is all these Ajax toolkits that are out there, and there are a ton of them, they're all in this sort of in the state where we keep discovering better and better ways to do things and new paradigms and new patterns, and they keep adding and modifying things, and it's a little bit risky to make an investment there. We then started playing around with Prototype and Scriptaculous, which is sort of it comes out of the Rails community, but it's totally standalone. You can use it with Java, you can use it with .NET, you can use it with PHP, you can use it with whatever you want. You really need to fully embrace JavaScript development. You are going to be writing JavaScript, which is not the case with ASP.NET Ajax. It has some great utilities, has some great visual effects. Again, the documentation was poor. It's a new technology library. That happens. It has been getting better. One of the really strong things about it was it comes with a great unit test suite with all these different implementations of all the different features. So you can go in and actually get an example, like a reference implementation of how does the slider work or how does this other thing work. One downside of putting these two together was they did not play well together. There were namespace collisions in the JavaScript that Atlas generated with Prototype, and we ended up just rewriting it with just straight. It is still ASP.NET, but we don't use any of the Atlas functionality. We go and it's ASP.NET with JavaScript embedded in it. And that was the solution that yielded us the best amount of functional control and still allowed us rapid development pace, which was important for this sort of skunkworks type of project. Steve mentioned Indeka. So Indeka is a company that they're actually just across town from us in Boston, and they build, as you said, a faceted navigation platform, which we have a lot of experience with and we have a lot of relationships with, so it was easy to get a development version of the server and install it and get it up and running. So we built it on that. The functionality you see with the drop-downs, that's Indeka is figuring out what to put in those drop-downs, what the numbers should be for each one. All that functionality, that is what Indeka calls their guided navigation. And so it was easier for us to build a rich experience on top of it because we didn't have to figure out how many wines in France are left in the data set. All those things Indeka does for us. The sliders were, we use Scriptaculous. They have a slider library. It was pretty straightforward. The big challenge was browser compatibility. They use a lot of CSS, DHTML positioning, and at a very fine degree. And whenever you get into that situation, switching between IE, Firefox, and Safari gets a little bit painful. So if we were going to go back, we might consider just doing the sliders in Flash to get that cross-browser compatibility. But it was something we were able to get working with a little bit of effort. Appear and disappear effect, those sorts of collapsing and expanding, that's all Scriptaculous. They provide a ton of ways to do really nice things on the interface like fading opacity, and they do it in a syntax that's much simpler than you'd have to do if you manually manipulated the CSS properties, and they'd also do it in a way that is cross-browser. So if there's a particular way you have to do opacity changes in IE versus Firefox, the library takes care of that. You just need to write it, in the Scriptaculous syntax, which is good. It is a simple, straightforward syntax. The histograms were actually nothing fancy. They were little one-pixel GIFs that we, or GIFs if you prefer that, and we changed the height based on sort of the proportion of, there's a lot of wines in the $43 range and there's not a lot of 44, and we just sort of calculated the max and then had the numbers for each element or for each, I guess, discrete dollar value from Indeka and just size the height of that individual bar graph appropriately.
The histograms, this is an example of one of those things where, you have one too many beers and you're thinking, oh, we can have histograms, and you roll over this, and this can go through this, and you can bell curves, and you talk about these things, and you've, and typically it's like designer types like me, like brainstorming all this insane stuff, and engineers rolling their eyes. But the fact is, some of this stuff is now possible to do, like he was saying, in a really fairly simple way that, just blew me away, because I thought histograms, yeah, that'll be like version 13 by the time we get to that. But lo and behold,
it was, and it was low-hanging fruit, and it was something that was fun to code. So it was a lot of fun. Star ratings as well. We just copied essentially the Netflix paradigm for that. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I talked a little bit about the sliders. Scriptaculous does offer vertical sliders. They can have it can be notchy. So it actually is the case with Vintage that it sort of notches to the different discrete elements. It's also a two-handled slider, which is sort of a neat thing that you don't see a lot. And again, Scriptaculous, we tell it, here's the graphic to use for the handle, here's the graphic to use for the filled part of the bar, here's the graphic to use for the empty part of the bar, and it takes care of essentially making it work. There's some code, we don't need to get into that. So the way, again, I sort of got ahead of myself. Indeka, just like it gives us that list of regions, Argentina has 142 and Australia has 882, we're doing the same exact thing for price. For $1, there are 0 wines, and for $3, there are 3 wines. I don't want to drink those wines, but and so on and so forth. Each discrete value has a number. We load that into essentially a hash and then scale the graphics appropriately. So that sort of leads us back to where we are in the funnel. And
yeah, a lot of what we spend our time thinking about is we don't want to throw sliders at, sliders are not a solution that's trying to find a problem by any means. And we don't want to just play with Ajax and Flash and all these things simply because it's there and it's popular and, everybody's doing it. It's really about understanding the problem. Where in your interface is there a problem? Where is there an experience that could be improved? Where are there things that users are doing on a regular basis that they just wish were easier? The way that Kayak, for example, when you're doing a search, does the auto-suggestion right there. It gives you the names of the airports as you're typing. Common things where we can apply simple, rich interface components that will make experiences easier. Or where do people want more control? If you think about the classic car configurator is a great opportunity for thinking about that rich level of control that now can be possible because of the rich interactions, things that we're looking at. So for us, that's why we really begin with this. We really begin with understanding the company, understanding the current website, where it's performing well, where it could be performing better, and then start thinking about how would a richer experience at this particular level, for this particular problem, how would that improve things or not? And let's try some things and experiment and test them. Because as you saw, we learned a tremendous amount by actually testing this thing, and we continue to test it in a very iterative way to really understand what works. And when are we pushing too far the familiar interface that people are used to, and when do we discover something new that we wouldn't have known if we just hadn't pushed ourselves out there and just tried something different? Sliders aren't necessarily new, but trying them in combination with this to winnow down a result set, there's something that seems to work here. We feel like we're on to something, and we want to keep exploring this direction. And then there's a ton of else that we want to do, and this is probably like 5% of our list of this whole bug tracker program that we sort of turn into a feature request program, because there's so much that we want to do in our, 20 minutes a week that we find to spend on this thing, something like that. But lots of opportunity. Think about compare functionality. On a typical online store, you're comparing multiple products, check boxes, and maybe there's a better way of doing that would make that whole comparison functionality feel more intuitive. And maybe we should all be testing those kinds of interfaces more. Scrolling. So the Microsoft Live, their search, where you can actually scroll infinitely. It's not like 10 results per page anymore. As you scroll, more fill in. You can keep going and going and going. I'd be fascinated to hear how that's tested, and if other people have tried that, how fundamental things like that can change behavior and can change interaction. Because historically, relatively few people click to the next result set to go to the page 2 of results. But maybe with that infinite scrolling, maybe maybe all of us would find much better results because people would be clicking more often to get what they need. Maybe that would be something that would really we'd see significant benefit from if we just gave it a try.
Or maybe not. And we need to do the testing to figure out what does Joe user or Jane user, how do they want it to work? How do they expect it to work?
One of the things that we're also playing with is on the detail page for a given wine. So if you click on a given wine here, how do we do cross-selling and cross-merchandising of other wines in a more intelligent way? So this isn't really implemented yet, but what we're looking to do is, let's say you've done a lot of filtering down by price and the general taste, you want something more oaky or whatever it is. Imagine you come to a wine detail page after doing those filters, and you can read about the wine, you can rate it, review it, all these things. But over here are recommendations of other wines that match those criteria. And the ones that you've chosen, not some standard static list, but this is the ones that that's oaky would be there and the price range would be there. And what you could do is right here, uncheck price or oaky and see other ones, and actually have a filtering mechanism right on the detail page, again, to help expose people to everything that we might have to offer, and for them to really explore in a very serendipitous way, as if they're in the wine store, walking around, looking at things that are nearby, trying to recreate that sort of feeling in an online environment. It's one of the ideas that we're thinking about. Okay. So this is live. It's at wine.molecular.com, which is a domain name we never thought we would have, but there you are. Please check it out. We would love to hear your feedback. It's an ongoing experiment. It really is. And it's version 2 of what we see to be as very many versions that are out there.
Actually, it's funny you mentioned that. There's a wine expertise company, like a real wine company, that approached us last week in New York, and they have a real data set, and they're like, well, how would you guys like to put some real data behind this and maybe adapt it to fit their site and add a few features that their stakeholders would want. So we're pretty excited about that if we could actually spin this into a real application, and it would be a nice excuse to get us some funding to do some more testing and more innovative things. What does compare look like in the perfect RIA world? So we're pretty bullish about being able to keep upgrading this thing. Questions, comments? I mean, what do you think? Is this the kind of thing that feels like
it pushes the user experience too far and starts to feel too different in terms of usability? Or do you feel like there's something to this that you think could work elsewhere as well? I mean, wine in a sort of exploratory topic like this, it might lend itself to. But, if a research company were to put filters like this and sliders on helping you find articles, for example, would that work? I mean, I'm curious sort of what your thoughts are, because for us it's an ongoing kind of thought experiment.
For text search results?
Yeah, the question is, how do we handle text searches within this environment? So we have something implemented. It's something that's ongoing, because we want to do, for example, the auto-suggest I mentioned on Kayak for this as well,
right.
But that's not quite there yet. But
so the way that it works right now, Endeca, in addition to being guided navigation, is a search platform, and they do all the search things. So if I search for California, it does a text search, and it implies relevance ranking from the back-end search platform and shows me just the wines that are in California. And if I sort of get to a place where I'm looking, I just want to see Merlots and so on and so forth, you can see California showing up in the left column as just another sort of thing that a user could remove or potentially change. We want to invest more into that. So what if the user gets to a place where they've narrowed it down and they're like, oh yeah, I want to add a search term. Searching in our application right now will start them over. So we need to do the little search within versus I really do want to start over, and how do we do that in an optimal way? And the type ahead search. So the classic example is Kayak, and I type New York, and LaGuardia comes down. I can click on it. It's a very easy thing to do. It's been done with Endeca before, and we just need to get to the point. But it's very important, and we've sort of overlooked that. The conventional wisdom says probably close to half of the users still prefer to start out with a search term. Google has conditioned us that that's the way you find things. So that is something we need to support. We've sort of been focusing more on the other side. We need to get to the text search side as well.
One thing that is important from an interface point of view that we've learned is when people do a search and you want to echo back what they've searched for, doing it in a way that is in the same general area as the other filters, as the other selections they've already made. So if they've chosen something, if they've searched for something, they've made a selection essentially for that word. If they've selected a filter, they've made a selection. And we're treating those selections the same way. We're using checkboxes for both. So you can undo your search by unchecking California. And by treating them consistently, we're sort of reinforcing the idea that all of these are controls. And by having behavior consistent, we reduce the learning curve as well. So people can actually get into that faster. But as Glenn mentioned, we have a ways to go here, especially the search within, which really needs to be here.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Endeca I'm sorry?
So we're using Endeca as the search, is the question?
Did you ask what the cost is? It's expensive. They would kill me if I
It's at least
gave
$50.
out price range. It's an enterprise package. They compete with autonomy and fast. Price ranges vary dramatically based on. Yeah, I can't. I'm sorry.
You're in touch with the better packages for faceted navigation, for guided navigation that are out there though now. Like, what are the other ones? Are there others out there that are doing the guided nav, the faceted nav that are
fast
better for smaller business kind of?
We have a lot of contacts at Endeca, so that we sort of get their version of the truth. So take it for what it's worth. Fast does. There are fast implementations that provide guided navigation functionality. The word is that you have to sort of implement them on the side, potentially using a database. I've only done interface design for fast. I haven't done an implementation, so I can't speak to that. Verity has something that feels like it, but I think that once you get a little deeper, it's not quite as robust. Endeca was the originator of it. As far as price, I I think upper 5 figures would be the starting point, just to give you something. It might be 6 figures. I don't know.
Other questions? Other comments? Otherwise, we would like to grant you a free 4 minutes of your life. It's a gift. Thank you very much. Feel free to come up if you have any other questions.
Thank you.